Cary's Government Access Channel.
call to order the February 25th meeting of the Cary Town Council. I want to thank you for joining us tonight from your home as we continue to follow the governor's state of emergency orders. We are streaming tonight's meeting virtually. The majority of council is present here with me tonight. We all had our temperatures checked before we entered the building. And as you can see, we have adjusted our seating arrangements to maintain proper social distancing. Each person has been provided hand sanitizer as well as a mask to use as they deem appropriate. To meet the requirements of the remote meetings law, we have one council member participating remotely through WebEx, and that is Council Member Jennifer Robinson. Hi, Jennifer, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. How are you doing?
We're doing great. Thanks for doing remote. All right, so first order of business will be to recognize Councilmember Smith for our ceremonial opening. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Would you please join me for the pledge of allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
We now move to adoption of the agenda. There's been a few changes to the agenda tonight. Staff has requested the additional of the adjustment to adopted meeting schedule to the consent agenda. Applicant for 20A04, which is 121 Lennox LLC and Smalltron LP annexation, and 20 REZ05 Roberts Road residential discussion items, has requested that these items be removed and returned to council at a future meeting. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
So moved.
There's a motion.
Second.
And a second. Roll call vote. Ms. Robinson?
Yes, aye.
Mayor Pro Tem France?
Affirmative.
Councilmember Yerha?
Aye.
Councilmember Liu?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith?
Aye.
Councilmember Bush?
Aye.
I'm affirmative as well, and we pass the adoption of the agenda unanimously. And that takes us to recognitions, reports, and presentations. And our first presentation is the Cary 150 History Moment. As we continue throughout our 150th celebration year, now Councilmember Yerha will give the monthly presentation to highlight time, people, and places from our past. Mr. Yerha.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Tonight's 150th anniversary history moment will briefly touch on just a few facets of Cary's African American history. In large ways and small, Cary celebrates all year round the fundamental ways that the Black community has made this town blossom, such as our Juneteenth event, which is pictured here, the Kwanzaa celebration, and the MLK Dream Fest. We celebrate especially in February during Black History Month. I hope each of you have had the opportunity to participate in some of the events in the past. Of course, we can't ignore the fact that slavery regrettably existed here before Cary's incorporation. For instance, 5 years after the North Carolina General Assembly appropriated funds for constructing a railroad intended to link Goldsboro in the east and Charlotte in the west, a bricklaying crew composed of, yes, 85 enslaved men began laying rails on the land right outside these chamber doors. And even with the abolition of slavery, things unfortunately did not change overnight. The literacy rate among African Americans here remained especially low, mainly because North Carolina's antebellum legal system prohibited enslaved people from learning to read and write. This trend began to change in Cary thanks to some residents' dedication, residents like preacher and teacher Reverend John William Meadows and longtime educator Miss Dora Stroud in the early 1900s. Reverend Meadows served as a teacher and the principal at the Cary Colored School, shown in the drawing, which was replaced in 1937 by the all-black East Cary Elementary School. And then again in 1969, it became the integrated Kingswood Elementary School of today. Due to the work of what was called the Cary Advisory Council, the all-black West Cary High School was desegregated in 1965. This school would later become West Cary Middle School. And a man by the name of J. Estes Byers, who served as principal of West Cary High School before desegregation, stayed on as principal during and after the integration process. Thus, he became the first black principal of an integrated school in all of Wake County. And then there's Cary High School itself, which was desegregated in 1963 when 6 girls, and you'll see their names here, 6 trailblazing girls, were reassigned from all-black Raleigh's Berry O'Kelly High School to Cary High. That was 1963. And speaking of Cary High School, we would be remiss if we didn't mention John Beckwith. John was born into slavery on the Edwards Plantation of Cary and later became Cary High School's beloved custodian and one of Cary's most beloved citizens at that time. Past students shared fond memories of Mr. Beckwith, the ringing of the bell that he rang until all students were safely in class. This, I believe, is a page from the 1922 Cary High School yearbook with a blow-up picture of John and ringing the Beckwith bell. He later went on to record his slave narrative in 1936 at the age of 83. Unfortunately, little is known about his final resting place. It's only listed as the county graveyard on his death certificate, but we do know the burial place of his wife and children. At the Cary First Christian Church Cemetery, Jenny, John's wife, and many influential African Americans are buried there to be memorialized and honored by future generations. In large part to the church's efforts led by Miss Sally Jones, and now with the Friends of the Page Walker, these stories will live on through the Friends' upcoming walking tour of this Cary landmark. The Friends of the Page Walker are collecting the stories of those buried here, along with the partnership of the town in the form of tree planting and headstone restoration. Be sure to check back in the summer of this year for more information on the walking tour and their brochure. Among those buried here are generations of the Arrington family. Pictured here is Arch Arrington Sr., who was a civic leader and very influential citizen of Cary until his death in 1933. The influence of African Americans on our spiritual life is extensive. 2 of the churches that have stood the test of time in our community are, first pictured on the left, Union Bethel AME Church on North Academy Street, right up the block, founded in 1893. And pictured on the right is the former building, also right up the block, of Mount Zion Church on Chapel Hill Road. The church itself is now located on Allen Lewis Drive, which was named for their longtime pastor. Mount Zion was established in 1865 and just celebrated their 155th anniversary. Yes, they're 5 years or 6 years older than Cary itself. As for the Cary First Christian Church, in 1883, it had the largest church membership of any church in all of Cary, having held its first service under a brush arbor on the cemetery grounds, then moved to a small wooden frame building on Holloman Street, and now at the church's new location on Evans Road, but it still has the original church bell and the beautiful stained glass windows on display. And speaking of Evans Road, the Evans family was one of Cary's largest landowners. Clyde Evans Sr. and his family donated land for Cary First Christian Church and for the West Cary Middle School. And the Evans family, along with the Arringtons and the Meadows and others, still live in Cary, and they contribute to the success of our community. That's the map on the right is the map of Evans Road. Today, Cary's black citizens remain active in Cary's spiritual life through our community's many places of worship, the fiscal life of Cary through our black-owned and operated businesses, and the social life of Cary through our community's black-run and oriented programs. Many of the places I mentioned tonight are included in the Cary 150 African American History Driving Tour, created in partnership between the Cary 150 Task Force and the Friends of the Page Walker Hotel. Yes, Cary simply would not be Cary without our vibrant black community, which is why this month, like we do every day in our hearts and minds, we celebrate their contributions, their history, and culture. I would like to recognize Cary's unofficial history around and about Cary, the book Desegregating Cary by Peggy Van Scoyoc, Carla Michaels and Barbara Wetmore and the Friends of the Page Walker, and Matthew Champagne and the staff of the Page Walker Arts and History Center, and of course, Cary Clerk, Virginia Johnson, for their help with this and all History Moment presentations. To learn more about our sesquicentennial plans, including the African American Driving Tour, please check out cary150.org. That's CARY150.org. For tonight, though, this is all for the History Moment. and I appreciate you listening.
Thank you, Mr. Yerha. Very interesting. All right, we'll now move to our next item, which is the financial update. And I'll recognize Assistant Finance Director Kimberly Branch, who will present the staff report, and no action is requested by council. Ms. Branch.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
Tonight we have your monthly financial update to keep you and our citizens informed on the impacts of the pandemic. I'll focus on the revenue outlook and discuss a little about our support for utility account holders. You all are familiar with this financial dashboard. Please note there has been no change in the direction within our focus areas from January's update. The highlight of this is that total Cary's general funds financial position continues to remain solid. Sales tax remains positive, outpacing the prior year in budget. Property tax collections met budget with the January deadline. With those revenues having positive trends, any shortfalls in parks, recreation, cultural resources, occupancy tax, and investment earnings should be covered at fiscal year end. As mentioned, we also wanted you all to be informed on how we are seeking to properly guide and inform our citizens during this time as matters pertain to utility bills. As a reminder, disconnections and cutoffs have been on hold since last March for non-payments. In August, we established 12-month no interest payment plans for accounts that were delinquent at that time. We've continued our support to help our citizens find utility bill assistance. For our next step, staff will personally reach out to about 1,000 account holders that are delinquent and/or have not responded to our payment plan communications. We will let the citizens know that we are here to help with payment plans and inform them on available payment assistance sources. Thank you again for your ongoing focus and attention to Cary's financials throughout this pandemic. Your attention is key part of Cary's successful financial management. That ends this update. I welcome any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Branch? Thank you, Ms. Branch.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We now move to our next item, which is the legislative agenda. Our final report, the 2021-2022 legislative agenda presentation. Intergovernmental Affairs Liaison Morgan Manza will present the staff report, and action is required tonight from council. Ms. Manza.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Tonight's report presents Cary's 2021 Biennium Legislative Agenda. This document supports Cary's relationship with officials at the state and federal level, which is essential to moving our community forward. Our agenda helps us in achieving Cary's vision as articulated in the Imagine Cary Community Plan. Since the 2021 and 2022 biennium is considered one legislative period, staff recommends the adoption of a 2-year legislative agenda. This will be the second time Cary considers a 2-year agenda and is consistent with other advocacy organizations, including the North Carolina League of Municipalities. Similar to prior years, additions to this agenda can be made at any time if necessary. You will also see that this year we've blended our state and federal priorities in order to take on a more holistic approach to addressing these areas. This year's agenda maintained a number of Cary's longstanding priorities. Items from this list, such as billboards and clean drinking water, are areas that council and staff are leaders in supporting in the region and across the state. It's also worth noting the additions to this year's agenda. We've added timely topics that are critical to the efficiency of our organization, such as electronic meetings. As you all are aware, we need the authority to hold electronic meetings beyond emergency declaration to allow us to adapt to the local needs of Cary. Also, in response to council's leadership in being great stewards of our finite resources, we've added environmental stewardship. Similarly, we've included housing affordability, as we know how important a range of housing choices is to the equity and prosperity of our residents. Finally, we considered priorities based on our partnerships with advocacy groups and communities across the state of North Carolina. So in addition to this agenda, we have 2 legislative items coming up. The first is our virtual legislative event, which is an opportunity to connect with Cary's state delegates. The second is the coordination of a proclamation in honor of Cary's 150th anniversary, issued by Governor Roy Cooper. At our core, we recognize Cary's role as part of the larger North Carolina community. We believe that what is good for all of North Carolina is good for us, and this theme is woven throughout the Cary's 2021 Biennium legislative agenda. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this agenda with you all this evening, and I am available for questions and comments.
Thank you, Ms. Manza. Questions for Ms. Manza? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the 2021-2022 legislative agenda as presented by staff.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Roll call vote. Ms. Robinson.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem France.
Aye.
Councilmember Yerhaw.
Aye.
Councilmember Lou.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Bush.
Aye.
I vote affirmative, and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Manza.
Thank you. You guys have a great night.
Thanks. We now move to Public Speaks Out. The instructions for submitting comments for our Public Speaks Out were attached to the posted agenda, and participants had the opportunity to send comments through email, the 311 online portal, and regular mail. I'll now open up Public Speaks Out and call on our town clerk to summarize any comments that we have received.
We've received 2 comments from Nick Barslow and Mary Collins, submitted comments in opposition to 19 REZ06, providing multiple points of how the plan is inconsistent with the Cary Community Plan.
Thank you. Are there any live callers tonight?
No call-in speakers.
Okay, call-in speakers rather than live. No call-in speakers, so I'll close Public Speaks Out and we'll move on to the consent agenda. For the benefit of people watching our meeting on TV, I'm going to take a moment to review our consent agenda items. Please keep in mind that one vote approves all of these items. On the consent agenda, we have adoption and affirmation of general record schedule, Lake Pine Drive improvements supplemental to interlocal agreement, 19A20 Foster, Vierson, Miller, Clayton, White, and Flythe annexation, index and codification of permanent records of the town council, consideration of amendment to downtown development agreement and grant of retaining wall easement, 19 REZ06 Carpenter Fire Station PDD rezoning, naming rights sponsorship at Wake Med Soccer Park, bid award for the 2021 water main replacement project, fiscal year 2021 street improvements project bid award, right-of-way conveyance to Holly Springs, adjustment and adopted meeting schedule. Councilmember Yalu asked that we pull item for discussion 19 REZ06 Carpenter Fire Station PDD rezoning. Would council members like any other items pulled for discussion? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion. Roll call vote. Ms. Robinson.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem France.
Affirmative.
Councilmember Yarha.
Aye.
Councilmember Lou.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Bush.
Aye.
And I vote affirmative. Motion passes unanimously. And that takes us to public hearings. Same rules apply for public hearings that apply for Public Speaks Out with one exception. Speakers now have 5 minutes. Instructions for submitting comments for tonight's public hearings were included in the public hearing notice. Participants had the opportunity to send comments through email, 311 online portable, and regular mail. All comments received before noon today were emailed to the council, and a printed copy was provided to us at our desk this evening. Our first and only public hearing is item 5.1, which is 20 REZ07 Arbors at Cary PDD. Assistant Planning Director Deborah Grannon will introduce the item, and council will not take action on this rezoning, but it will be referred to our Planning and Zoning Board for their review and recommendation, and we will vote on this item at a future meeting. Ms. Grannon.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. The Arbors at Cary is a request to rezone approximately 5.75 acres located at Cheswick Place. This is the site of a development previously known as the Briarcliff Apartments. The new property owners are requesting to apply the mixed-use overlay district to the subject property and to change the zoning from residential multifamily to mixed-use district with an associated preliminary development plan. The subject rezoning area outlined in yellow is west of Kildare Farm Road, north of Wren Drive. It's adjacent to the Wren Drive Post Office and just south of Briarcliff Elementary School. There's other multifamily developments located to the south and to the west, and a single-family dwelling located to the northwest, and several single-family multifamily dwellings to the east. The subject property is a portion of the 17-acre Arbors at Cary apartment complex, outlined with a yellow dashed line. The existing zoning of the 5.7-acre area is residential multifamily, and it's surrounded by a 12-plus acre parcel, also zoned residential multifamily and owned by the applicant. The applicant is requesting to extend the mixed-use overlay district to include the subject parcels, and as I mentioned, change the zoning from RMF to mixed-use district. Just to clarify this a little bit, I'm going to give you some background. The community was developed and built in the early 1970s. As I mentioned, it was called Briarcliff. There were 248 multifamily dwelling units, which exist today. The site was comprised of multiple parcels, which were recently recombined into their current configuration, and that was going to facilitate redevelopment of some of the aging dwellings and minimize resident displacement. The area proposed for rezoning is this 5.75 acre portion in the center of the development, which consists of 92 multifamily units. So the request seeks to increase the total number of these units by just 27. So that would give you a total of 119 units within the center portion. And then the 12-acre parcel would remain as it is currently with 156 dwelling units. With the MXD zoning, the applicant has provided a preliminary development plan which limits the use to multifamily dwellings and accessory uses. And as I mentioned, there would be a maximum of 119 multifamily units. The 43 new units would be distributed between 8 buildings. 76 units located within the MXD area would remain. The preliminary development plan proposes to redesign some of the neighborhood amenities, and it also includes 2,500 square feet of community gathering area in the northeast corner of the site, which is more than double the area required by the LDO. New pedestrian connections are proposed within the site and along Pond Street that improve resident circulation and access. With MXD zoning, applicants may propose development standards that differ from the LDO to allow more flexibility and better meet Cary's overall planning objectives. The applicant has proposed a maximum building height of 50 feet, no perimeter buffer for this internal portion of the development. They've asked to allow 90-degree parking spaces along the road serving the multifamily units, a minimum of 1.5 parking spaces per unit. That's 1.4 parking spaces per unit, which would include visitor parking. They've asked that they not be required to provide individual storage units for each dwelling, and not to be required to have buildings fronting a public street. According to Cary's most recent GIS maps, the site is partially impacted by stream buffers and floodways. However, no construction will be allowed in these areas. Field determination of such features is required at the time of development plan review. Cary's future growth framework map designates the site as a heritage neighborhood. Both large and small multifamily developments are included as predominant use types in this category. The heritage neighborhood category also acknowledges opportunities for replacement of existing use types and for properties to be redeveloped to include higher density residential units. In our preliminary analysis, staff finds the proposed development mostly directly addresses policies in the Live, Work, Shape, and Move chapters of the Imagine Cary Community Plan. The proposal maintains neighborhood character, contributing to housing choice and supporting provisions of affordable housing. The addition of multifamily units in this area may provide workforce housing to fulfill a work chapter policy. The SHAPE chapter supports infill and redevelopment of existing residential uses and revitalizes targeted corridors. The MOVE chapter supports the provision of safe, multimodal street designs and transportation infrastructure design that will address land use context. Staff mailed public hearing notification to property owners within 800 feet of the subject site, and this exceeds both the state and the LDO requirements. A neighborhood meeting was held virtually in September. 6 nearby residents attended the meeting. Comments and questions from those in attendance were about the architecture of the proposed new buildings, the project timeline, the residential recreation space, whether Section 8 housing vouchers would be accepted, fire hydrants, and street maintenance. One attendee voiced general support for the project. And staff has received 2 additional emails about the case with concerns about how the property would be managed. This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant's representative, Mr. Jason Barron with Morningstar, is here to present his comments on the request. And then following the public hearing, he and I will both be available for your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Grannon. Mr. Barron.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group here on behalf of the applicant in this case. Unfortunately, I'm getting a little bit of an echo on my end, so just bear with me for a second. I'm not sure why that's the case. Joining me virtually via the town Zoom feed for this public hearing are Malachi McKinney of Banff. They are the owners of the property. Also, Lee Cochran of Laurel Street Partners, who is the proposed developer of the site. They are the folks who are partnering up with the existing owner for this, what I think is a unique opportunity. And then lastly, Laura Holloman and her colleagues at the McAdams Company are watching, and they are providing land planning and engineering associated with this opportunity. As always, staff and Ms. Grannon have done a thorough job in outlining via the staff report and the presentation as well, essentially the nuts and bolts of the request. I just want to kind of take a step back and help you understand a little bit of the big picture associated with the moving parts and what's going on. As Deborah mentioned, the Arbors Apartments represents part of the town's naturally occurring affordable housing, and it's in an area where reinvestment and redevelopment is in need, and there's an opportunity to do that, and that's exactly what's going on here. The proposal that's in front of you is a rezoning request to increase density and to replace some existing units and to add some existing units within kind of the heart of the Arbors Apartments. As you can note through your staff report as well as the preliminary development plan, around it will remain the balance of the Arbors apartment community. And so the rezoning represents a portion of what the big picture is contemplated to be. That big picture is an overall reinvestment and revitalization of the Arbors Apartments. Every single apartment building that is part of the Arbors will be a part of this revitalization effort and will receive, candidly, some TLC that is probably a little long overdue. And so this is really a small piece of what, generally speaking, will be a reinvestment into this community, a revitalization of the units that exist there, a removal of some units that have fallen into a state of disrepair and replacing those with new units. And generally speaking, just kind of bringing the community into a state that is in better fit with the character of the area that it's located, as well as Cary's expectations associated with a multifamily community of this type. As part of that process, and I understand there have been some questions, or at least one question related to some stormwater issues or questions at the site, it's important to note that this redevelopment plan for all of the Arbors will include a comprehensive stormwater management plan to address the entirety of the development, not just the piece that is part of this zoning. So I wanted to provide kind of a big picture perspective associated with the moving parts that are in play so that the council is aware of the optics associated with exactly what is going on. As Ms. Grannon noted, before you, however, in this zoning case is a request to remove some existing units, replace those with new units, add some units to an additional portion of the site, and to increase the overall unit count by roughly 27, a total of 27 units over this approximately 5.75 acres portion of the arbors. As can be noted in the staff report, part of that will be the extension and creation of new sidewalk connections that don't exist today, including the extension of a sidewalk along the frontage of buildings adjacent to Cheswick Place, but also down Pond Street, where there currently is not a sidewalk. Having those connections, the owners believe, is a strong benefit to the community in general, especially in a location like this with a use like this. And also want to note that in terms of how we have constructed this zoning, one of the things we thought was important in order to prioritize the focus and to ensure that there would be minimal impact on adjacent owners was to only do the MXD zoning, only do this increase in density internal to the site. And so leaving that existing RMF density, that existing 12 units to the acre, essentially wrapping the entirety of this donut hole zoning, we believe provides for a nice transition and allows for development and redevelopment, not only of the units that need it, but also does so in a way that minimizes impact on adjacent owners that are located in that area. And so with that, again, I just wanted to provide some kind of big picture optics associated with the request so that the council's aware of the moving parts. And certainly I'm here to answer any questions that you may have related to either the contents of the preliminary development plan, what is in the staff report, or anything that I've shared with you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. So now is the time for a public hearing for 20 REZ07 Arbors at Cary PDD. And I'll call on Deborah Grannon once again to summarize any comments that we've received. Ms. Grannon.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we did receive comments from a husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Lopez, on Wicklow Drive. They had concerns about how the property was being managed. They had concerns about some of the residents with where they were parking and how they were walking their dogs. And they asked that the increase not take place with an increase in units unless the property is better maintained.
Thank you, Ms. Grannon. I'll now call on the town clerk to see if there are any call-in speakers.
No call-in speakers.
All right, very well. I'll close the public hearing and open it up to council members for any questions, comments.
Question? I have a question as far as the community gathering space, as far as why that is being proposed so far to the northwest of the site and kind of away from some of the new units that are being proposed. If somebody can speak to that.
Sure.
I can mention that. Oh, sure, go ahead. Okay.
No, I didn't realize I was unmuted. I was going to say, Councilman France, we have located in that area where certainly the new units are going to be located. But again, if you think about this in the greater context of the existing units that are around it, part of the thinking, and those existing units being the ones that aren't included in the rezoning parcel that's before you, part of the thinking by creating the community gathering area there was to provide accessibility to the units that are located along Bargate. So it was really kind of a design that incorporates other aspects of the property, not just the one that's part of this zoning case.
Okay.
Other questions?
Hey, Harold, can you hear me? This is Jennifer.
Yes.
Hey, Jason, are those orange rectangles reflective of the footprint of the buildings?
That is our best estimation as of today. The ultimate layout we don't know. We'll determine at the time of development plan. Just for your verification, Councilor Robinson, these are going to be townhome style multifamily units. That is the intention, and so these are going to be kind of side by side multifamily, but. What we have proposed here is what we think is a layout that makes sense, but we haven't really gotten to that point of the development planning part of the process.
Okay, my impression when I look at it is that it's somewhat jammed together there. It looks like the distance between, like, for example, 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 is just the width of a parking spot, which is just very, very close for houses to be to each other. I'm not sure exactly
Understood.
how that would work. So, I think we're going to need a little bit more context around this to be able to understand if this is really the right fit that way. I noticed that you had a 50-foot height restriction. I guess that's because you're going with a townhome style product. But the height, especially given it's inside this circle, doesn't really, that's not really a big deal to me as much as making sure that you're laying this out in a way that people would actually want to live there. And it just looks a little tight to me.
Understood. I'll relay that.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, this will go to our Planning and Zoning Board for their review and recommendation, and will return to us at a future date. And if you're following this item at home, you have the option to continue to contact us or the staff to ask questions, and you can participate at any council meeting and Public Speaks Out and speak on this topic. And we would appreciate your comments if you have any comments. All right, we'll now move to the item that was pulled for discussion. That's 19 REZ06 Carpenter Fire Station PDD rezoning. Principal Planner Katie Dry will give a report, including our Planning and Zoning Board's recommendation. Ms. Dry.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is a request to rezone 14.6 acres to allow the development of up to 300 multifamily units and 5,000 to 10,000 square feet of office. The site is at the intersection of Carpenter Fire Station Road and NC 55 Highway and at Indian Wells Road. The request is next to Cary and NCDOT's road widening project for Carpenter Fire Station Road, which will be funded by the 2019 Shaping Cary's Tomorrow Parks and Transportation Bonds. This project will widen the 2-lane road to a 4-lane median divided section with curb, gutter, street lighting, and pedestrian and bicycle facilities. The current zoning is R40, GC, and ORD. The site is within the Watershed Protection Overlay District. The applicants are proposing a planned development district, minor zoning. The Watershed Protection Overlay District will remain. There have been multiple changes to the case since this was first presented to you for a public hearing. So I will start by sharing the changes, followed by an overview of the overall rezoning request. And so since the public hearing, the applicants made the following changes. They conducted a balloon test in August of 2020 to show the maximum height of 50 feet, as shown in this picture along Carpenter Fire Station Road. For buildings fronting Carpenter Fire Station Road, they reduced the height to 50 feet max. It was originally set at 60 feet. The 50-foot height is reflected in this balloon test. They also added architectural conditions for these buildings fronting Carpenter Fire Station Road and have increased the streetscape along Carpenter Fire Station Road from 20 to 30 feet in width. The open space area was increased from 1 to 1.5 acres. They increased the upper story trees to be planted within the open space to a total of 50. Within the open space, there will be also a sitting area with 4 benches, as shown by this rendering attached to the PDD master plan. They added a screening requirement for the HVAC units on the roof to be screened with a roof line. Added a timing condition for the office to ensure it's built at the same time as the multifamily development. They added clarification of the timing on road improvements, increased the amount of EV charging stations, and clarified the greenway connection alignment to Carpenter Fire Station Road and the future street side trail. The changes that I just reviewed are incorporated into the overall rezoning request, which I will now briefly review. So again, the request is for Planned Development District, or PDD minor. Cary's LDO describes the PDD zoning district to allow projects of innovative design and layout that would not otherwise be permitted. And in return, they are expected to deliver exceptional quality design, above average open space, and circulation. The PDD master plan is shown here. The buildings and parking area are in orange. The amenity and office space will be along Highway 55. The PDD would allow up to 300 multifamily units and 5,000 to 10,000 square feet of office space, and a 1.5 acre area of open space. The open space area is shown in green. Buffers and streetscapes are also shown in green. The open space will be planted with 50 upper-story trees. Community gathering elements of the plan will include a swimming pool with a courtyard, a dog park, and a seating area. Other elements of the plan include a parking ratio of 1.6 spaces per unit, 4 EV charging stations, enclosed postal boxes, HVAC units to be placed on the roof and shielded with the roof line. 200 of the units will have balconies, and architectural conditions have been added for buildings fronting Carpenter Fire Station Road so that there will be a 45% masonry requirement for the north and eastern side, and there will be visual breaks in the facade. The site has frontage on 3 roads. Streetscapes on these roads will include a 30-foot Type A streetscape on Carpenter Fire Station Road. This is a reduction of 20 feet from the LDO requirement for 50 feet. A 50-foot Type A streetscape on Highway 55. This streetscape will be averaged. Indian Wells Road, there will be a 30-foot Type A streetscape. The applicants are proposing to clear and grade the streetscapes on Carpenter Fire Station and Indian Wells. And to offset the clearing, new plantings within the streetscape will exceed the minimum height by 25%. Buildings will be 60 feet high maximum and will transition to a maximum of 50 feet next to Indian Wells Road and Carpenter Fire Station Road. There will be access on Highway 55, Indian Wells Road, and to the road adjacent to the YMCA site. The applicants have committed to road improvements as identified in the traffic study, including construction of a westbound left turn lane on Indian Wells Road at Ansley Stream Lane in the Blakely neighborhood. The Planning and Zoning Board considered this case on January 25th of 2021 and recommended unanimously that the case is consistent with the Cary Community Plan. The Planning and Zoning Board Chair, Dan McFarland, shared the following overview, which I will read into the record. Questions and board discussion focused on streetscape reduction, road and traffic improvements, parking reduction, site conditions, site and use, and zoning designation. The board felt the road and the related traffic improvements were acceptable and offset the reductions in the streetscape, much of which is a result of road improvement work. Although the board recognized that the commercial space was relatively small, on balance, the proposed multifamily development and the commercial development in the nearby area was appropriate. The board also found the PDD was an appropriate zoning. A concern was raised that the increase in electric vehicle parking stations reduces the number of general parking spaces and asked that the issue be considered in the town's parking study. The board expressed an appreciation as to how the applicant's project has changed and improved with neighborhood and staff input. The resulting unanimous vote to find the case consistent with a comprehensive plan reflected the board's finding that, on whole, the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the Imagine Cary Community Plan. This concludes the statement from Mr. McFarland. Overall, staff's finding for this case is that it is consistent with the Cary Community Plan. It furthers many policies of the plan. The applicant has made several changes to the proposal between the council public hearing and the Planning and Zoning Board meeting to further consistency with the plan. The proposed use and densities are consistent with the LIVE chapter and the mixed neighborhood designation. The case proposes modifications to reduce the streetscape on Carpenter Fire Station Road and clearing and grading within the streetscape. The applicant proposes to offset this request by increasing the streetscape width from 20 to 30 feet. They've increased the masonry to 45% along the north and east facades fronting Carpenter Fire Station Road. They've also added a condition to visually break up the building facade along Carpenter Fire Station Road. Further, the open space has been increased from 1 to 1.5 acres and will be planted with 50 upper story trees. And the applicant has addressed the aesthetic elements of the development. This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant's representative, Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group, is available, and I'm available as well for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dry. At this time, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Liu, who asked that this item be pulled for discussion. Ms. Liu.
The reason why I pulled this item off the consent agenda is that I want to use this opportunity to invite you all, my fellow council colleagues to have a discussion about where we are, seeing that an increasing trend, requesting, converting, rezoning the general commercial and office into multifamily residential units, especially with the COVID situation, and that probably many may feel there isn't a market for office and the commercial development. But just as a general, I just want to take a moment and see, I don't know, on the Cary map, I'm curious, how much office space remaining in Cary, how much commercial, because we have so much less remaining now. And I just want to take a moment to invite the councils to provide your input. It is the type of direction we are going, and if we allow the several hundred multifamily units in one area, and so what kind of environmental standards are we setting? What's the goal of the council to allow the rezoning? And are we trying to solve the affordable housing issue? Are we trying to make it more affordable for people who currently live in Cary, or we try to make it affordable for people who will be moving into Cary? So I just want, I'm curious about what the council may think.
Other comments?
Hey, I have some comments.
Okay.
Y'all reached out to me, and I thought this was a good idea to pull it off of the consent agenda. In the past, it really took a high bar for a rezoning item to go onto the consent agenda, but now, because we changed the responsibility of our planning and zoning board, it's much easier for a rezoning item to go on the planning and zoning, on the consent agenda. I think she makes a good point about the office, and I think it's worth investigating. If we don't have the information today, maybe it'd be worthwhile for staff to come back to us with a map of the land that's still available for office, and for us to be able to qualify the value of this land for office compared to other sites, and see if it is necessary for us to retain it for office someday in the future. A couple other little points about it. When I read the staff report, I had a little bit of uneasiness about us approving the waiver for parking and allowing 1.6 spots per unit. I mean, a 30% parking reduction is actually fairly substantial. And I'm worried about that, given the fact that we've asked our staff to give us an assessment of parking demands. And my understanding is that they're not far off from releasing that information, but it still precedes that information. So I feel like it's premature for us to approve this parking reduction when we're so close to getting information about the necessary parking reductions. The last thing I would just say is we talk about the fact that we want our projects to be compelling. We want it to really enhance our community. I think that there are a lot of good things that have been added to this rezoning request that are very positive. For example, shielding the HVAC on top of the roof. I love that. I do like the tree planting requirements and so forth. But this is a really unique site in the sense that it has 4 front sides. And it's not often that we get developments that are that way, but this is one of them, and we might be getting a lot more in the future. But you could say that any one of these sides is the front door of this project, or the front side of it. So I was a little perplexed to see that the standards for 49% masonry were only applied to the east and to the north, especially since we got so much feedback from our citizens that live in the Blakely community about this project, which is the south side. The west side is an access point that a lot of people use for the YMCA. So it'll be very, very visible. And right now, it's just about one of the prettiest little drives left in Cary. And so I'd hate to see it not continue to look attractive. In regard to making a compelling case, I can't help but to think about some of the other projects that we are being approached with right now from other developers where they're tucking parking into the project, maybe on the first floor and building above it. As I said earlier, the height requirements don't really resonate with me as much as making sure that that there's ample pervious space and green space around the project so that it looks like a place that people want to live. And I would hate to see a project go in not only with insufficient parking, but taking up the whole site with parking. So there are several reasons why I was glad that y'all decided to pull this. And I will be interested to see if anybody else is curious about the parking reduction or the office, the value of office at the site.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Other comments?
So one of the things I thought about when I saw this was that originally one of the questions I asked staff was how many multifamily units do we have in this area? And if you just go a little bit further north, there's quite a few multifamily. In fact, I think staff says something like 10,000 in I think it's a 2 to 3 mile radius. So there's quite a number of units. The other concern I have is, and I go back to Councilmember Smith, and I know that Councilmember Robinson has said it, I don't love it. I mean, we're getting to the point where we have to have this compelling reason for doing this. And even when you look at the picture that we saw on the screen, where it says buildings / parking area, I don't know where the buildings are going to be. I don't know where the parking is going to be. What is that going to look like from Indian Wells? It's a little bit confusing, and the only thing I can see is, a street network that cuts through it. It's not that I hate it. I don't, but I don't love it. And how do you get over that? If the applicant was going to say, well, what do you need for me to love it? I would say I'd need a little bit more idea of what it's going to look like. As Councilmember Robinson said, we talked about having 2 sides that are important, but I agree with her. There are 4 sides to this unique piece of land, and I still think that commercial is still an option. Is it a bad place for apartments? No, it's on a major, thoroughfare, or it's on a highway 55, and Carpenter Fire Station, which is currently being widened. But I just am not over the hump to say, yeah, I fully support this.
Other comments?
No.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Smith?
I have to admit, when I was approached and asked about, should we pull this and have this discussion, my first couple of questions were around, well, not questions, but, my observation at the time was that when it first came out, we've seen improvement since then. And at the same time, there's a lot of office up in RTP and projected, and the thought was, by the changes made, that this would address not affordable housing, but housing that would be very attractive to those that want to work in the area. So, I was actually a little surprised by the question, but it was a good question to ask. Why is this on consent, and why aren't we discussing it more? So I really appreciate that, let's say my thinking was challenged on that part. There's a couple of things in some of the feedback that we got that I'm not sure is directly related to this, but I think as we look at future planning, and we look at recent announcements in the auto industry and the apparent future serious increase of electric vehicles and so forth, we may want to start considering just what are our standards, and just when should we start looking at that. And I'm not trying to hold this project hostage for that, but I think those are good questions. I think they're creeping up on us faster than we thought several years ago. But a couple of points that really resonate listening to my peers is, If we're going to do rezoning, I'm sorry, I don't know how you define it either, Lori, but where's the wow factor? You know, where is it? And, you know, maybe we shouldn't give up on the precious few O&I land that's still available. So I think Jennifer made a good point. I'm not sure what to do here. I really struggle on this one. But when I start looking at it with some clearer focused lenses, and I think of the feedback that we're all sharing tonight, you know, I definitely think we ought to be taking a pause. There's so much new ideas that you suggested, that, you know, I'm more inclined to want to table and have some additional conversation or thought. At the same time, I'm not sure I'm prepared to say exactly what that is that we should be looking at. So it's not a great answer, but I'm just kind of sharing my thoughts out loud in hopes of hearing from the others also.
Okay.
Question.
Mr. France?
Question for clarification. I mean, I'm hearing a lot about, you know, office and you know, rezoning office to residential and stuff. Did I miss something in the staff report?
It's a tiny piece.
My recollection is a little tiny piece on the very edge of the property, and the rest of it was designated neighborhood.
Well, the
Yes.
rest of it's R40, which is a.
That's the zoning, but for
Yeah.
the community plan,
Yeah.
it's mixed neighborhood designation, which I understand, you know, mixed use or whatever. You could argue that they're not offering much of a mix. That's fair. But I'm hearing a lot about office. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything, because I don't look at this one in that we are flipping office to residential like other rezonings in the past. Is that correct?
If you don't mind me adding, there are two parcels right at the corner of Carpenter Fire Station and Highway 55 that are general commercial.
Right.
But the rest of it is zoned R40.
Yep.
Which is that small ORD portion at the corner of Indian Wells and Highway 55.
Gotcha. And then I do understand some of the challenges with, you know, trying to develop this as commercial, given the changes that have occurred and eating into the right of way and NCDOT and stuff like that. When I read the staff report, you know, combined with the unanimous Planning and Zoning Board recommendation, our staff's recommendation, you know, I kind of like the proposal, honestly. I kind of looked at it from an economic growth perspective, in that, you know, as we all know, there's a huge housing shortage in Cary and in the region right now. I think any given month, there's 60 to 90 homes for sale in Cary. Apartment vacancies are, you know, less than 5%. And the reason is Cary's one of the greatest darn places to live in the country and the region, and people want to come here for a lot of the opportunity that Cary has to offer, not just in jobs, but, you know, wonderful universities, hospitals, the airport, and a lot of other things that, you know, help lead to the wonderful quality of life we have. But beyond that, you know, not that I don't care about people that want to come here, but I think about my kids, you know, my grandkids, and those kids and grandkids of all of our citizens, that if, you know, if our housing stock and housing supply doesn't keep up with that growth, then, you know, we're all going to be waving goodbye to our kids and grandkids to other municipalities and other cities and other areas. So, you know, that's a concern to me. And I think when I see a high quality project that, not to Ms. Robinson's point, not that it can't be improved upon further, you know, where they've done a lot to make this a quality project, you know, I'm kind of inclined to say yes. Also does provide a more affordable housing opportunity for folks that may not otherwise be able to afford a single family home, especially in this area, or who just maybe prefer the apartment style living. But I appreciate the applicant's efforts to address the concerns that were raised both at the, you know, public hearing and planning board meeting. You know, planting 50 upper story trees, that's a nice get. The 1.5 acres of open space, I can appreciate the comments or the concerns regarding the 1.6 units of, or spaces per, of parking per unit. I too would probably like to see that parking study, you know, before maybe we approve some other projects, but at the same time, I'm like, you know, we've given that approval to previous rezonings, so why is it fair to hold this one up if we've done it before? So I like the project. I was prepared to vote for it, and those are my comments. If there is not consensus to move forward at this time, then I would certainly like to make a motion to table this. You know, I don't think this warrants a denial in any way.
Mr. Yerha, it's me and you. You want to go or you want me to go?
Well, I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
To clarify the mixed neighborhood designation, that's different than mixed use. The mixed neighborhood designation, if I'm not incorrect, is that it should be primarily residential with just some office or commercial on the periphery, which is exactly what we're getting here. Mixed use is all different kinds of uses. Mixed neighborhood is different residential uses. Having said that, I'm not in love with the project either, but I do appreciate the changes made by the applicant since the public hearing, especially the streetscape increase along Carpenter Fire Station, the reduction in the building height there, and the additional masonry requirement. I like the additional open space and the 50 upper story trees. I just trust that they're going to be planted in a responsible manner so that they'll survive after they're planted. One other comment, some of the emails we received referenced Chapter 8, the SERVE chapter of Imagine Cary, which includes several environmental related policies. I've been advocating for a long time to make this chapter part of the rezoning review, and the staff's been working on this diligently, and I'm told that it's going to be part of our next council agenda on March 11th at the quarterly meeting. I'm looking forward to that, and I'm hopeful it's going to have a positive effect on future rezonings, not necessarily on this one. So I'm okay with tabling it if the applicant thinks they can do something better. Bring it back to us.
Okay. So that leaves me. My comments tend to fall in line with Jennifer and Jack, because I struggle with this as well. I tend to back up when I get stuck on one like this. So I went up to 30,000 feet and I'm like, okay, let's look at the Cary community plan and talk about that. And then I started thinking about that in general. When you look at the staff report, there's all these check boxes and then there's a few that are checked. And I'm like, well, if we approach it that way, then we can get multifamily in just about any infill project in Cary. And so, just about. And so I'm like, well, is that my issue? What really belongs on this site? And I'm like, well, it could be argued several ways, but I think multifamily would fit. So what is your problem, Harold? And I said, well, my problem is the intensity. You start asking for reductions in parking and buffers and all this stuff, you have too much in one small place. And I think that's really what boils down to the problem I have with it. I don't hate it. I think the use is appropriate. I just think it's too intense. And those are the only things I can add to what Ms. Robinson and others have said. So we've all had comments we've made. I know Councilman France, Mayor Pro Tem France would like to make a motion, so I'll recognize him.
Make a motion that we table 19 REZ 06 Carpenter Fire Station Road PDD.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Discussion on the motion to table it. Do we need to give a date or is that just indefinite? There's Lisa.
You don't need to give a date.
Okay. So there's a motion to indefinitely table and it's been seconded. Discussion?
Well, I think I think we owe it to the applicant for clarity, and I think there's some common themes here, but there's probably still a few that are, a mixed message. If we're going with, I would like to better understand why we have to reduce the height, and if we had the height, of course, then that begs the question of density. But would that help with the situation with the flexibility of managing parking. I'm really concerned about the parking. We're seeing a lot of this. I just, I've said this before, so I don't feel like I'm saying anything different. I feel like sometimes the data points with parking reduction are voodoo math. I mean, it just, we have areas where we have overflow issues.
And they would go next door is where they would go.
Right,
The
and so
YMCA. Yeah.
we keep getting these that say based on some formula, we could reduce it 30%. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I'm going to need a little bit more convincing on that. My flexibility would be on the height, unless there was a compelling reason, because it's all four corners are like in view. But I would rather have the better quality and not focus on just the height.
Okay, and to follow up with my concerns, even though it's intense, if you did like Ms. Robinson said and take some of that impervious surface away, maybe you can't make the business model work with structured parking for all of it, but at least some of it, then I could, and put the buffers back the way they should be. Now I'm in a different ballgame.
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts. I know Mr. Stiegel wants to make a comment here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think there are some comments that, for this item specifically, and then I think just generally that will help. First, on the parking, certainly makes sense. If I were a council member, I would want to have a better understanding of what the new standard is going to be. But what you've been seeing over the last, well, longer than a year, but certainly over the last year, while it appears, and it's really associated with the project, the staff is driving that parking relief as much as anybody. And so we know our parking standard, while it's not done, does not work for us. It doesn't work for our environmental goals, and it doesn't work for our tax-based goals. And so while it may give the appearance that that's being requested by the developer, we're fighting our own ordinance. And so that's why it's great to have this done, and it is almost done. And so you'll have that very, very shortly. And you'll be in a better position to apply it more specifically project by project. It'll be a great advancement. Secondly, it's been a couple years now since we've had a conversation with the council, and certainly Councilmember Liu wouldn't have been involved in that, on this office, the preservation of office rezoning sites. And so one thing I want to assure the council of is for those sites that we deem to be the most important to our future, and we'll explain what that means. If there was a rezoning request for those, and we do get those requests, they don't make it this far. And if it was a precious one, by definition, we would be recommending against it. So if you see the staff's recommendation supporting an office rezoning, by definition, that means that the dynamics have shifted and we no longer view it that way. But we want to bring you in again to that discussion, and we did that a couple years ago. So Councilmember Liu's suggestion, supported by Councilman Robinson, I think that will be good to do. And I don't know if that'll be at the next quarterly, or we might need maybe a special work session that could do, the parking and then the office kind of rezoning, because we've already got a lot of items building for the quarterly. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. But I think that would be a very healthy exercise to go through, because what you've noticed on a lot of these rezonings, they are very, very similar. So the big projects that are for rezonings are obvious for everyone to see, the Fentons and the mall, and et cetera. Downtown, those type of redevelopment projects. But then you have these others that are, the big greenfield projects are few and far between now. There's not a lot of land left. So the other ones are more remnant-like, and they're much more difficult to develop. And the scope of them is limited. And so they have a lot of very common characteristics. And so some of the previous considerations when it comes to zoning occurred quite a long time ago. But they all kind of fall in a very similar category. So I think by addressing the parking issue, the office rezoning issue more holistically, it'll give the council a lot more comfort, as being witnessed here tonight, on kind of how we are going forward with some of those things and how we view them. And the staff report and the presentation can only capture so much of that.
Hey, Harold, this is Jen. Can I add something?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I just want to say that, for me, the aesthetics of this building are going to be very important. A lot of people consider Carpenter Fire Station Road and 55 intersection to be kind of a doorway into the Western Cary area. People think of themselves, I live west of 55. This needs to look really good, and it needs to look good from all four sides. The parking is one component, so I totally agree, Harold, with you and Jack, talking about that impervious surface. So as far as giving direction to the applicant, I would say I underscore or support what you said, and then also the aesthetics on this site, making sure that this is something that we're really proud of and it really enhances our community.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Any other comments before we vote? Okay, we have a vote to table, starting with Ms. Robinson.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem France.
Aye.
Councilmember Yerha.
Aye.
Councilmember Lou.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Bush.
Aye.
And I vote affirmative as well, so we have tabled this item until a future date. That was our only discussion item, so we're ready to go into closed session, and I'll recognize Councilmember Bush.
Pursuant to GS 143-318, 11A 13 and 6, I move that we hold a closed session to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of one or more individuals or prospective public officers or employees, to consult with attorneys employed by and or retained by the town in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the town, and to prevent the disclosure of information that is made privileged or confidential by GS 143-318 10E.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Discussion. Roll call vote. Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem France.
Aye.
Councilmember Yerha.
Aye.
Councilmember Lou.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Bush. And I vote affirmative as well. We'll now go into closed session in room 10035, and when we return, we'll adjourn the meeting. So we're now moving into closed session. meeting at this time. We have no other business on our agenda, so I declare this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.